introducing a dynamic author whose journey has taken her from Houston, Texas to Princeton University and beyond. For 16 years, she was the editor of the MultiCultural Review, which is a journal for research about diversity and equity in education. Her career spans teaching, editing, and writing, driven by her passion for storytelling. What sets my guest apart is her unique perspective as an author diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, offering authentic portrayals of the autistic experience in her novels like Rogue. Fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, her translation work, including the acclaimed Pardalita, amplifies diverse voices. Notably, her young adult novel Torch earned her the 2023 Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Young Adult Literature. This gripping narratives intertwines themes of banned books with the backdrop of Soviet occupation, showcasing her talent for thought-provoking storytelling. With a keen eye for history and a commitment to autistic representation, her work inspires. Please welcome to Unbanned Coolies, Lyn Miller-Lachmann.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you for that really nice introduction.
Can you share with us a pivotal moment from your childhood that sparked your passion for storytelling and set you on the path to becoming a writer?
Yes. Basically, I feel like I became a writer before I could even physically write. I was sitting in my first grade classroom, and I was not very happy there. I didn't like school. My teacher just seemed not to like me. I had trouble making friends in the class. The academics came easy. I'd figured out how to read, but then I got in trouble for reading ahead of the class and never could quite understand how we were supposed to learn to read, but I got in trouble for reading. Anyway, I was sitting bored and thinking about my own classroom and writing a story. I made up a story about a classroom just like my classroom, but I gave all the students names that I liked, and the teacher was nice, and all the students were my friends. And I think it was really a way of making a world, the world that I wanted, creating it through the imagination, because I had so little control over the world that I was in.
Your journey has taken you through different careers, including teaching and editing. How have these experiences influenced your approach to writing and storytelling?
Well, I was a history teacher for a number of years, and I prided myself on creating lessons that the students, that put the students into the history so that they could experience it through simulations. It made history come alive. And the students enjoyed it, and it also emphasized the story in history, the cause and effect, the decisions that had consequences. And with students playing the roles, it was also a way of putting ordinary people with universal desires and interests into the history. And that got me thinking about the possibility of writing historical fiction, and particularly fiction that privileges the lives of ordinary people and not the elites who dominate the textbooks. So teaching had a lot to do with it also. You know, I got to know the kids, and they kind of kept me thinking young. And editing, it was a review journal mostly. We had articles, feature articles, but we also mainly reviewed books for children, teens, and adults on issues related to diversity. And that meant I got to read a lot of books. And I think one of the pieces of advice I give to anyone who wants to become an author, wants to become a published author, who wants to write, is read a lot. Because the more you read, the better you will be when you start to write.
Lynn, your journey with autism, especially Asperger syndrome, which is a form of autism spectrum disorder characterized by difficulties in social interaction or nonverbal communication, has likely shaped your perspective in unique ways. Could you share with us how your experiences with Asperger's has influenced your life and work as an author, and how it contributes to your storytelling?
Well, I want to point out, first of all, Asperger's syndrome which became a separate category in 1994, was folded into the autism spectrum in 2013, which was about the time that Rogue came out, my middle grade novel Rogue. And growing up, I was very much on the outside. I didn't know why. I was diagnosed as an adult. And when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time watching the other kids and trying to imitate them, except it never really worked. I wasn't very good at it. So, for instance, I knew where the popular girls' table was in the cafeteria, and I thought that if I sat there, I would become one of the popular girls. So I put my tray down, and one of the girls in that group pushed my tray to the floor. That episode kind of haunted me for decades, particularly the fact that I just stood there crying and nobody came to help me. And so I always asked myself what would have happened if I had picked up that tray and slammed it into her face. And that became the beginning, that became the opening chapter of my novel Rogue. Because Kiara, like me, she wants to be popular and thinks that sitting at the popular girls' table will do it for her, and the tray's pushed to the floor. She slams it into one of the girls' faces and is suspended for the rest of the year. So her plan on the one hand, she salvaged her dignity by doing it, which I did not, but on the other hand, she's kicked out of school. And her plan to make friends and be popular, well, that's gone out the window, because she's sitting at home alone getting a school district tutor to keep her up with her studies. I did a lot of thinking about, my struggles as an outsider and what would have happened if I'd made different decisions, as Kiara did in Rogue, or lived in a different place and time, such as Tomasz in Torch, who did not live in a country that had the kind of choices that we have in the United States. He lived in a totalitarian country where his future was mapped out for him. And on the one hand, that was a lot more predictable and a lot more certain, and he felt that no matter what he did, there was a place for him, even though he also struggled in school and didn't have friends. But on the other hand, he saw the contradictions between this ideology that was so neat and inspiring to him, but in real life, it was a lot messier, and people didn't follow the rules that they were supposed to follow of this utopian ideology, and in fact did the opposite. So this utopia ultimately became a frightening dystopia for him and for his friends when the Soviets invaded, and the freedoms that they'd come to enjoy under the brief liberalization of communism, those freedoms were very quickly snatched away.
Your young adult novel, Torch, received significant recognition, including winning the 2023 Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Young Adult Literature. Could you tell us more about the inspiration behind this novel and how its themes resonate with your own values and experiences?
I grew up during the Cold War, and there was a lot of us versus them thinking. The West had the free market and capitalism and democracy, although in fact, capitalism was imposed on a lot of countries without democracy. And the U.S. government had a lot to do with that. And then the other side, which was, communism and controlled by the Soviet Union. I took a class in high school. I was a sophomore in a class of mostly seniors, and we studied sociology and political theory. And one of the things we studied, the teacher was a libertarian, but he didn't really impose his views on us. He wanted us to explore our own views. He was a very good teacher in that way. I became captivated by the idea that people were equal and everybody belonged, and you had the job or the place in society that you were best equipped for. So for me, as a very good student who, for instance, was not very good at social things and at sports, and social skills and sports are the currency of high school. And I was at the bottom of the heap competitively, even though I had the highest grades. And I thought in this other type of society, my intelligence would be, and hard work in school would be appreciated. I realized that it wasn't so simple. You're in a place where you're having a hard time and you're not being valued for who you are. You're not accepted. You're not supported. You're not thriving. You tend to idealize other places where that's happening, where you could find a home. And this is what I idealize, just as, for instance, in Torch, Stepan, who's one of the other main characters, who feels that he's being pushed into a certain kind of box, that because he's a hockey player, he's a very good hockey player, but he's also gay. And it's something he has to hide. And he's also kind of a free thinker and a rebel, and that's something else that he's being suppressed, especially after the Soviet invasion. So he idealizes the West, and he idealizes the United States. And he doesn't realize, for instance, that there was as much homophobia in the 1960s in the U.S. as there was in Czechoslovakia. That was sort of where a lot of this story came from, was my not fitting in and thinking that the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
In addition to your writing, you're also an accomplished translator. How does your work in translation contribute to your growth as a storyteller? And what do you hope readers take away from the diverse narratives you help bring to English-speaking audiences?
I mean, Torch and my new book, Eyes Open, which is a verse novel set in Portugal in the 1960s, they both came from or were inspired by a book I translated many years ago, a book called 3 Balls of Wool Can Save the World. And it's the story of a family in Portugal which had a fascist dictatorship at that time, and also suffered from book banning and, very limited selection of movies and commercial products that people could take advantage of because of a very repressive right-wing dictatorship. This family in Portugal was trying to get rid of the dictatorship. And they sort of also believed that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And when they fled the country, they ended up in Czechoslovakia. And they soon found out that the freedom that they sought when they left Portugal did not exist in this very drab communist country. So they created a little bit of their own freedom that was in fact a metaphor for the Prague Spring, which was this brief period of democratization before the Soviet tanks rolled in and the Soviet Union occupied the country. As a translator, I don't just translate the words. I have to create the entire setting and context for those, or evoke it for an audience that may be unfamiliar with it. It's always a balancing act in terms of translation. How literal you are? Do you keep the portrayal of the world as it is with, the original, because the person who wrote it is very familiar with that world, and somebody who doesn't live there and hasn't grown up with that is not familiar with it? Or how much do you change it? How much do you, say, Americanize a book? And so I had to do a lot of research. And in doing that research, I encountered, because when I do research, I go down rabbit holes. Translation both helps me in terms of figuring out how much to reveal and how much to, leave unsaid in terms of the history, but it also helped me specifically in this case to create these two books and some of the stories that make their way into both Torch and my new book, Eyes Open.
I love your massive Lego collection. Is there a connection between your Legos and storytelling?
I started building with Lego when I was a child. And then when I had kids, my son was also into building with Lego, and we had a pirate village that he ended up selling when he went to college in order to pay his fees for to join a fraternity. But when he left for college, I decided to start my own Lego town, and I used his empty room to start collecting the buildings. And this was around the time that Lego issued its modular line. So I started buying the buildings in the modular line, and then I was inspired to create my own. So many of the buildings in my Lego town are either my own creations or they are modifications of kits that Lego originally issued. And so I've created this whole town called Little Brick Township, and it has minifigures, and I've written little stories that I put up on Instagram with the minifigures, and some of them I've added to my blog as well. I did one that when Governor Christie of New Jersey was involved in a scandal over the closing of the George Washington Bridge to hurt a political enemy, I did a Lego reenactment of that event that is still on my blog as the Chris Christie Scandals in Lego. And then the other thing I do is I create, when I write a novel and I'm imagining what the characters look like, I make the characters in minifigures. So I find like hair for them and clothing for them and put them together with their friends, and sometimes I make houses for them. I have houses for various characters in books.
Lyn Miller-Lachmann's career as an author, educator, and advocate showcases the power of storytelling to inspire, educate, and connect. Lynn's perspective as an individual on the autism spectrum enriches her narratives with authenticity and depth, diversifying our literary landscape. Utilizing methods such as incorporating Lego to spark creativity and aid in storytelling, she demonstrates a dynamic approach to her craft. We extend our gratitude to Lynn for generously sharing her world with us today.
Thank you very much, Christopher, and I appreciate the great work you're doing to get books into the hands of readers to counteract the move towards censoring those books. So keep up the good work, and thank you very much.